My sister's wedding reception and the screen displayed Infertile Divorced Failure High School Dropout. Low income, single, laughter erupted. My sister grinned. Don't laugh too much, she might cry. My mother sipped her wine. My father chuckled. Just a joke, right? I took out my phone. Begin. The room went silent. Margaret Wilson woke up in her small apartment in the New York suburbs, irritated by the sound of her alarm clock. She prepared to catch the commuter train and had her usual simple breakfast. To her family, her life as a clerk at an insurance company appeared to be ordinary at best. Her income as a general office clerk was certainly not substantial, but there was a secret no one knew. Margaret ran a popular YouTube channel called Healing Hearts, where she had built an online community for survivors of emotional abuse. Her videos had been viewed millions of times, and her words resonated with many viewers. However, her family knew nothing about this. Margaret's father, Robert, was a successful real estate developer, owning vast tracts of land in upstate New York and developing numerous luxury residential areas. His company, Wilson Estates, was highly regarded in the region. A perfectionist, Robert imposed strict standards on Margaret and was quick to criticize her for any perceived failures. Her mother, Evelyn, had once been a model and still maintained her elegance and beauty, holding a significant position in local society. Yet, behind her beautiful facade lay a coldness. She pressured her daughters to succeed as women. When Margaret started showing more interest in social issues rather than academics, Evelyn dismissed it as wasted potential. Margaret's younger sister, Victoria, thrived in the life their parents envisioned, graduating from a prestigious university and working at their father's company, now preparing to marry James Anderson, the son of a prominent local family. The relationship between Victoria and Margaret was complex. The younger sister had always been the favorite and looked down on Margaret as a failure. Checking her phone, Margaret read a message from Victoria about the wedding invitation, letting out a long sigh. 2 years prior, she had ended her 5-year marriage to David, and her family believed she was abandoned due to infertility, repeatedly blaming her for this perceived flaw. "You still haven't replied," Victoria's message read. "I hope you're not planning to ruin my special day. Please don't mention your miserable divorce in front of everyone. James's family is refined." After reading the message, Margaret gave a dark smile and moved to the window, glancing at the certificates and plaques adorning her living room wall. Through her online activities, she had built a reputation as an advocate for survivors of emotional abuse, and even established a non-profit organization. Yet she had never shared this with her family. Sitting at a small desk in the corner, she composed a reply to the wedding invitation. "Of course I'll attend. I'm also making special preparations for the family." Margaret then opened a special app on her smartphone, which displayed the words Healing Hearts Live with a status of ready underneath. Taking a deep breath, she contemplated her decision to attend her sister's wedding reception, which was part of a larger plan. Her family believed her ex-husband David was a dropout still struggling, but in reality, he had become an executive at a successful technology company. The real reason behind their divorce was far different from what her family assumed. Margaret opened her closet and retrieved a modest navy blue dress. This would be her weapon. The navy blue dress was unassuming and wouldn't attract attention, yet it was the ideal outfit for unveiling the truth concealed in her smartphone. Margaret had kept the fact that her YouTube channel, Healing Hearts, had amassed over 1 million supporters, along with her thriving nonprofit organization for victims of emotional abuse, a secret from her family. For 2 years, she had been gathering evidence for this moment and had made legal preparations. With one last check of her phone, she confirmed an email from her lawyer that read, "All preparations are complete." Nodding slightly, she whispered to herself, "I won't run away anymore. It's time to reveal the truth." The ballroom of the Grand Palace, a luxurious hotel in Westchester County, was extravagantly decorated for Victoria and James's wedding reception. Crystal chandeliers sparkled from above, and tables were adorned with white and gold flowers. Local dignitaries had gathered to celebrate the union of the Wilson and Anderson families. As she paused at the venue's entrance, Margaret felt a mix of nerves and determination. She had chosen her navy blue dress to blend in with the more extravagant outfits around her. Checking her smartphone, she took a deep breath. "You finally came," a voice said. Turning around, Margaret saw Evelyn, impeccably made up and dressed in an expensive champagne gold gown. Her mother scrutinized her from head to toe, frowning slightly. "You could have dressed up a bit more." This is a special day. Everyone is watching, she remarked, before disappearing into the crowd. Margaret made her way to her assigned seat at table 8, where distant relatives and employees of her father's company sat. She greeted them quietly and took a sip of water. The MC's voice echoed throughout the venue as Victoria and James took to the dance floor, swaying to a sweet Ed Sheeran tune. Victoria's pure white wedding dress sparkled with beads, reflecting light with each graceful movement, while James gazed at her with adoration. Margaret observed quietly, her smartphone vibrating slightly in her hand. A message appeared. Ready. After the dance, food was served, and champagne glasses were filled, leading to the speeches. Robert Wilson stood first, stating, "We are honored to welcome the Anderson family." His speech was brief and devoid of sentiment, but pride was evident in his tone. "My daughter Victoria has always been our pride, possessing the talent and beauty that represent the Wilson name." Margaret sipped her wine, her gaze drifting around the room until it landed on the projector screen. Evelyn's speech focused on her own youthful beauty. "Victoria has inherited my beauty," she declared, eliciting polite laughter from the audience. Then Victoria stood up, her smile sparkling as she surveyed the crowd. "Today is the happiest day of my life," she announced. "I want to thank everyone who has supported me, especially my parents. Thank you for showing me the perfect model of life." She glanced in Margaret's direction, curling her lips slightly. "And I've prepared a special presentation," Victoria continued, "a slideshow of family memories." As the venue lights dimmed, the screen illuminated with images of Victoria, from childhood to the present. Beautiful, successful, always surrounded by her parents. "And let me share a little about my sister, Margaret," Victoria said. The screen changed, displaying in bold letters, "Margaret Wilson, infertile, failed marriage, high school dropout, low income." Single giggles erupted throughout the venue, escalating into loud laughter. Margaret's photo appeared on the screen. She remained still, her expression unchanged, but internally she thought, "It's begun." Victoria appeared to relish the audience's reaction. "Don't laugh too much, she'll cry," she joked. The venue erupted in even louder laughter. Evelyn sipped her wine, staring ahead with an expressionless demeanor, though a faint glimmer of pleasure sparkled in her eyes. Robert chuckled and leaned toward James's father, whispering, "Just a joke, right?" Margaret slowly stood up. The laughter continued, but gradually faded as people noticed her presence. "May I say a few words too?" she asked softly. Victoria looked bewildered. This clearly wasn't part of the plan. "Of course," she replied, "but please keep it short." Margaret retrieved her smartphone. "Let's begin," she announced. She tapped the screen, and suddenly the venue's display changed to show Healing Hearts Live, along with the words, "The reality of emotional abuse by family," and a viewer counter that quickly climbed above 1 million. An immediate hush fell over the room. Simultaneously, a chat box appeared in the corner of the screen, with messages streaming in. One particularly stood out. A message from David that read, "The evidence is gathered. The legal team is standing by. You are not alone anymore." A gentle smile crossed Margaret's face. "Ladies and gentlemen, hello. Let me share what I know about the Wilson family." Victoria turned pale, glancing at their parents. Evelyn dropped her glass, and Robert half rose from his chair. "What are you trying to do?" he asked in a low voice. "Just telling the truth," she replied. "The truth everyone has been wanting to hear." Margaret's hands remained steady, her eyes filled with unwavering determination. She was finally about to unleash her voice, silenced for so long. In that moment, she realized she wasn't the family's failure. She had become the voice for 1 million people. The smartphone screen continued to broadcast live, with comments flooding in. Silence enveloped the room. Standing at the center, Margaret held her back straight. Her voice was calm, yet her words cut like ice. "Hello, to the 1 million people watching this moment live. I am Margaret Wilson. Today, I break my silence." Victoria half stood, shouting, "What kind of joke is this? Stop it right now." Margaret locked eyes with her sister. "A joke? You love jokes, Victoria, especially at my expense." She tapped her smartphone screen and pressed a button, causing audio to fill the venue. "Hey, Mom, why can't Margaret have children?" came Victoria's voice. "Her body is broken, just like her life." Evelyn's cold laughter followed, David was right to leave her. Men want to have children. Margaret can't do anything. As the recorded conversation continued, Margaret pointed the camera toward the audience, zooming in on the faces of Robert, Evelyn, and Victoria. All three were visibly shaken. James wore a puzzled expression, shifting his chair slightly away from the scene. "This is what I recorded at a family Christmas gathering," Margaret explained. "A conversation I overheard. But there's more." The next recording played, featuring Robert's voice. "Margaret is a failure. Victoria is my real daughter. Margaret was just a mistake." Evelyn stood up, shouting, "Stop it! This is eavesdropping. It's illegal." Margaret responded calmly, "No, Mother. In New York State, recording is legal if one party consents. I consented. And for the abuse I experienced directly, I am my own witness." She began playing another video from her smartphone, showing 16-year-old Margaret returning home from a piano concert, excitedly reporting, "I got second place." "You mean you lost?" Robert replied. "The Wilsons are never second." "It's either first or nothing," Robert declared, making young Margaret's smile vanish. "Second out of 25, Dad," she replied. "Loser," he shot back, leaving the room. The atmosphere in the venue began to shift, with uncomfortable whispers rising among the guests, many of whom looked ill at ease. James's parents appeared visibly disturbed, exchanging hushed conversations. Margaret continued, "Throughout my life, I've experienced countless moments like this. I've been called a loser, defective, and a disgrace. But the most cruel remarks were about my infertility and divorce." She looked up at the screen. "To all viewers, many of you have endured similar experiences. Emotional abuse from family is often invisible and hard to prove. That's why I started Healing Hearts, to gather the voices of abuse survivors and create a supportive community for them." At her words, Robert suddenly stood up. "What nonsense! You've always sought attention. You're ruining Victoria's special day." "Attention?" Margaret chuckled softly. "Dad, I have 1 million followers on YouTube. My book is set to be published next month. I run a nationwide nonprofit organization. If I wanted attention, I would have had it long ago." The venue fell silent. Surprise washed over Robert and Evelyn's faces. They had been completely unaware of their daughter's success. "You thought I was just a low-wage clerk with a failed marriage, a defective woman who couldn't have children," she stated. "I let you think that because I knew if you were aware of my success, you'd try to sabotage it." Her voice grew stronger. "And what you know about David is also wrong." At that moment, the doors swung open and a tall, confident man entered. David Clark. The once awkward young man had transformed into a polished businessman. He walked directly toward Margaret, prompting murmurs to ripple through the venue. Evelyn sank into her chair, while Robert reddened. David stood beside Margaret and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Margaret, I didn't divorce you because you were infertile. I couldn't endure your family's abuse any longer. That was my weakness, and I'm sorry I left you alone." He scanned the room. "I'm now an executive at a technology company. After our divorce, I was inspired by your courage. Watching you recover from your family's abuse helped me rebuild my own life." He gestured toward the screen. "In fact, I've been secretly supporting Margaret's nonprofit organization for survivors of emotional abuse. I've been waiting for the day she would bravely stand up." Suddenly, several members of Margaret's online community stood up at the back of the venue, nodding in support. "We are here with Margaret," one woman declared. "Her courage has empowered us to reclaim our voices." Victoria stood frozen in her wedding dress, her perfect day unraveling. She glanced at James, but he was staring into the distance, confusion etched on his face. "Margaret, why would you do this?" she finally managed to ask. "This is my wedding." Margaret fixed her gaze on her sister. "You've mocked my life publicly. For years, you've elevated yourself by hurting me. Today, you crossed a line. I couldn't stay silent any longer." David took Margaret's hand. "We've been gathering evidence and keeping records, years of emotional abuse by your family. And now, Margaret is sharing the truth with millions." Tears glistened in Margaret's eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of liberation. The release of breaking years of silence and speaking her truth. Taking a deep breath, she declared, "For a long time, I was made to believe I was worthless, but today, I reclaim my worth. And I send a message to all those in similar situations. You are not alone. Your voice has power, and it's never too late to speak the truth." David smiled beside her, his previous guilt for not protecting her transformed into pride in her strength. Robert and Evelyn sat in stunned silence. Their perfect facade had crumbled, crushed under the weight of the truth. While the venue was quiet, a storm was brewing online. Margaret's brave actions had ignited the hearts of millions. As chaos enveloped the venue, Robert finally stood up, his face flushed with anger and veins bulging at his temples. "This is completely inappropriate," he shouted. "Margaret, you always want attention. You're always playing the victim. This is nothing but exaggeration. No one in the family has ever hurt you." Margaret locked eyes with her father. "Really? Then what is this?" She tapped her smartphone and played a new recording. The voice of 13-year-old Margaret filled the room, followed by Robert's harsh words. "You're just stupid. Why can't you be like Victoria? She's only 11, but already much smarter than you. You're a disgrace, Margaret, a disgrace to the Wilson family." When the recording ended, Robert was left speechless. Evelyn stood up, attempting to defuse the situation. "This is taken out of context. Robert was just being strict for Margaret's own good. We loved her. We were just trying to toughen her up." Margaret shook her head quietly. "Love? When was the last time you hugged me? When did you ever celebrate my success?" She pointed at the screen. "Look, my channel helps millions. I've written books, given lectures, and established a non-profit organization. Yet you never once said you were proud of me because you didn't even know about my achievements." The atmosphere in the venue shifted as many guests expressed discomfort, some getting up to leave. James's parents in particular looked visibly upset. James's father stood up. "What kind of farce is this? Is this the family we were trying to connect with?" Robert rushed to approach him, but he waved him off. "No thanks, I don't want to be involved in your family issues." Maintaining her composure, Margaret spoke again. "Everyone, this is not a farce. This is the truth, and I have legal measures prepared as well. A lawsuit for emotional abuse." She pointed at her smartphone screen, which displayed an email from a law firm. "I've been collecting evidence for 2 years, and my lawyers say I have enough. Preparations for a damages lawsuit for emotional abuse are complete." At these words, color drained from Robert's face. As a real estate developer, he understood the potential impact such a public scandal could have on his business. "Margaret, we're family," he suddenly said, his tone shifting. "Family matters should be resolved within the family." Margaret smiled. "Now, you bring up the importance of family?" She continued the live broadcast and looked at David. "We know what a real family is. It's not about blood ties. It's about the connections between people who respect and cherish each other." At that moment, an unexpected turn unfolded. James stood up and moved away from Victoria's side. Step by step, he approached Margaret. I don't intend to marry into such a family," he stated, staring at Victoria. Victoria turned pale. "What are you saying? This is all lies. Margaret has always just been jealous." James shook his head. "I've seen how you talk about your sister these past few months, how much you despise her. Today you've shown it in public. I don't want to spend my life with someone like that." He stepped closer to Margaret, standing before her. "I respect your courage. Thank you for being the voice of many who have suffered abuse." The venue fell silent once again. Victoria began to cry, her perfect makeup starting to smear. Margaret took a deep breath, preparing to unveil the final truth. "I must speak one more truth about my divorce and infertility." She glanced at David, who nodded in encouragement. "I am not a failure. The divorce didn't happen because David stopped loving me. It was because he couldn't stand up for me." David nodded sadly. "I was weak. Watching Margaret's family hurt her, I couldn't protect her, and I ran away from that guilt. It was the biggest mistake of my life." Margaret continued. "Now, let me reveal the truth about infertility." She hesitated for a moment, but quickly steeled her resolve. "According to the doctor's diagnosis, it wasn't me who was infertile, but Victoria, who inherited Dad's DNA." A murmur swept through the venue. Victoria shuddered, and all color drained from her face. "That's a lie!" Victoria cried out. Margaret responded quietly. "When I had tests done, the doctor confirmed there was no issue with my reproductive ability. But what about you, Victoria? I know you and James have been trying to conceive without success. It's a medical fact. The DNA abnormality Dad carries is only passed to female children." At this revelation, Robert sank deeper into his chair, trembling. His long-hidden secret, his DNA defect, was now public knowledge. Victoria turned to her parents. "Is this true?" Evelyn was at a loss for words, simply covering her face with her hands. This was a truth she hadn't been aware of either. Margaret continued softly. "After my divorce, you forced me to accept the label of being defective. But in reality, the defect lay elsewhere. The venue was engulfed in complete silence. James moved away from Victoria and headed toward his parents, who were preparing to leave together. Margaret finally turned the camera toward the viewers and addressed them directly. The truth can sometimes be painful, but it is the truth that sets us free. Today, I spoke my truth, and in doing so, I have become free." David held her hand, standing by her side, as members of Margaret's online community gathered around her, forming a supportive circle. It was a true turning point in Margaret's life. A year later, Barnes & Noble in New York City was overflowing with people for a book signing event featuring Margaret Wilson's new book, Silent No More. The lines stretched outside the store, with hundreds waiting to meet her. Margaret had become a nationally recognized advocate for survivors of emotional abuse. The Healing Hearts Foundation she established gained international recognition, running programs supporting abuse survivors in various locations. She regularly appeared on television and gave lectures as an expert on emotional abuse. Next to the signing table sat David Clark. Although they hadn't remarried, they were bound by deep friendship and mutual understanding. Together, they ran Healing Hearts, each leveraging their strengths to grow the organization. "Ready for the next lecture tour?" David asked during a quiet moment. Margaret smiled. "Yes, everything's going well, starting in California and covering 12 cities." After the signing, Margaret returned to her office, located in a midtown high-rise with a stunning view of Central Park. Looking out the window, she reflected on the changes of the past year. For the Wilson family, that wedding reception had marked the beginning of the end. Robert's real estate company, Wilson Estates, had lost its reputation and was forced to downsize. Following the exposure of his abusive behavior online, many business partners severed ties with him. Robert had become a reclusive figure, far removed from his once confident persona. Evelyn had distanced herself from society. Many of her former friends avoided her, and invitations had drastically dwindled. With the ugliness behind her perfect facade exposed, she had lost her place in the world. As for Victoria, her engagement to James had ended, and she had left her father's company, moving to another town. Although Margaret occasionally heard rumors about her sister, there was no direct contact. Margaret's thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. "Margaret, someone wants to see you." The door opened to reveal Victoria. She was no longer in her usual flashy attire, instead wearing simple jeans and a sweater. Her face was nearly bare of makeup, and signs of fatigue were evident beneath her eyes. "May I come in?" Victoria asked hesitantly. Surprised, Margaret gestured to a chair. "Please." Victoria slowly sat down, folding her hands in her lap. "I read your book. It was wonderful." Margaret remained silent, waiting for her sister to continue. Victoria stumbled over her words, taking a deep breath. "I came to apologize for everything I did to you." Tears welled in her eyes as she continued. "I'm also seeing a professional counselor. I realized I was receiving the same treatment from Dad. I targeted you to avoid becoming a target myself." Her voice trembled. "I was trying to protect myself by hurting you. It was cowardly, terrible, and unforgivable." Conflicting emotions swirled within Margaret, years of pain and anger mixed with a complex love for her sister. "Healing takes time, Victoria," she finally said, "but it's not impossible." Victoria looked hopeful. "Really? I don't know if we can rebuild a relationship of trust," Margaret replied honestly. "But it's worth trying, especially if you're committed to facing yourself." The two began to discuss the possibility of this new relationship, quietly agreeing to take small steps forward. It wasn't a complete reconciliation, but it was a significant first step. A few weeks later, another book signing for Margaret's new release, Silent No More, was held. As she signed books, engaging in brief conversations with each reader, David stood beside her as a friend and business partner. A little distance away, Victoria modestly helped as a volunteer. While signing, Margaret reflected on the unexpected journey her life had taken. Once labeled a failure, she had become a beacon of hope for millions. She smiled at the next reader, opened the book, and wrote her trademark phrase, "Your voice has power. Don't be silent anymore." Margaret Wilson.